it might be a rebellion at that point. So we will have it next week, so you know. It'll be the first Sunday of the month. So with that, turn to Acts 21. We're going to finish this chapter today. So we have a lot of stuff to cover. Again, Paul finished, last week we discussed Paul finishing his third missionary journey, which ends him up in Jerusalem. Despite the warnings that he has been given, he's been trying to arrive to Jerusalem by Pentecost. He's also there to deliver the financial gift he gathered from all the Gentile churches. So he has, again, an entourage with him who's helping with this whole thing, and also has the intention of preaching to the religious Jews, having been one prior to his conversion, couple decades before this. So with that, we can, if you would stand, we're going to read a few verses. I'll read it out loud, starting in verse 17. We'll go to, I think, verse 26, and then we'll pray. We'll go through it. It says, "And when he had come to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly. On the following day, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present. When he had greeted them, he told in detail those things which God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord, and they said to him, 'You see, brother, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and they are all zealous for the law. But they have been informed about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying they ought not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs. What then? The assembly must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. Therefore do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Take them and be purified with them, and pay their expenses, so that they may shave their heads, and that all may know that those things of which you were informed concerning you are nothing, but that you yourself also walk orderly and keep the law. But concerning the Gentiles who believe, we have written and decided that they should observe no such thing, except that they should keep themselves from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality.' Then Paul took the men, and the next day, having been purified with them, entered the temple to announce the expiration of the days of purification, at which time an offering should be made for each one of them." Let's pray. Lord, again, as we go through your word, as we see Paul's heart, just representing your heart towards his people, towards the individuals that needed to hear the gospel and needed to hear that it wasn't about their customs, wasn't about their law, but it was about you. The fact that you revealed yourself, and not only that, you revealed why you came through your death, burial, and resurrection. Lord, so we just ask that you would speak to us as we go through this passage. I ask it in Jesus' name. We all say, you may be seated. So, Paul's in Jerusalem. He's been wanting to get here, also to Rome, which we'll see towards the end of this book. But it says, when he arrives, the brethren receive him gladly. Again, he was bearing a huge financial gift. They were struggling with the persecution and all that. And so he came bearing a financial gift to offer to the Jerusalem church. And then he gives a missionary update, maybe going through all 3 missions he went. When it says he shares details, it's the idea of recounting everything. And so he probably mentioned the multiple missions he's been on and what God was doing. He shares this with James. There's a few James in the Bible. He was not the apostle. He had died. But he's the brother of Jesus, the author of the book that was currently in circulation. And I'm going to mention that a few times as I go through this study. Some books were already in circulation. I might as well get it out of the way now. First and Second Thessalonians had already been written. First and Second Corinthians had already been written. The book of Romans had already been written. Galatians had already been written. So you have those books that were in circulation, and that'll come into refute kind of the accusations that were given towards Paul at this time. Quote some of those as they should have read. So with that, you have the brother of James and the elders, Matthew 13, 55 and 56, shares with us that Jesus had more than just one brother. Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. Two of his brothers ended up writing some letters in the New Testament. We have Jude, that's from Judas, and then we have James, the book of James, which many believe to be the first book. So that was also in circulation, but written by James. And his sisters, are they not with us? So we don't know the names of his sisters, but he at least had two. So he's going to share what God had done among the Gentiles, revealing his love. He wrote this in Romans when he says, "For I dare not to speak of any of the things which Christ has not accomplished through me, in word and deed, to make the Gentiles obedient. I give my testimony. I share what God's done to me, so that they might come to the Lord." He says, "In mighty signs and wonders by the power of the Spirit of God, so that from Jerusalem and round about Illyricum I have fully preached the gospel of Christ." So he shares what God had done among the Gentiles. He also shares, with that, when they heard it, they glorified the Lord. They were excited about what God was doing amongst the Gentiles. James then shares what was happening in Jerusalem, kind of gives his report. He says myriads. Myriads is about the number 10,000. So there's more than 20,000 individuals that have come to understand that Jesus was their Messiah. I should have found out the population of Jerusalem at this time. All I know is at these feasts, which were required by the law 3 times a year, Pentecost, Passover, and Tabernacles, the city itself would swell with tons of people, over hundreds of thousands of people. So, and he says myriads of people have come to believe in these last 20, 30 years since Jesus died on the cross. But they're zealous for the law. They were zealous to maintain their customs and their practices. That's what he's going to have to deal with as he deals with a ton in a lot of the letters. Hebrews, if you believe Paul to write Hebrews, he deals with it there. Galatians, another huge one. And when he writes the book of Romans, he deals with it also. We'll talk about those things. So what he hears from James is Jewish Christians continue to do Jewish things. They continue to stick to their culture. And with that being said, he then goes to the rumor in verses 21 to 26. Paul is accused of basically being against the law and circumcision. This is what he said about it in Galatians 5. "Listen, I, Paul, tell you this. If you are counting on circumcision to make you right with God, then Christ will be of no benefit to you." It's pretty clear on the subject. Circumcision was not going to save you. The law does not save you. Jewish customs will not save you. Because at that time, still practiced was the idea that if a Gentile came to the Lord, they thought that they would have to basically go through some of the law, turn off my phone. They would have to go through some of the laws. They had to go through circumcision. They'd have to basically become Jewish, and then they recognize them as a Christian. And that's not what God prescribed as far as salvation, how it works. What Paul taught about the law and salvation, again, was represented throughout these books, that everyone is saved the same way. Shared this in Romans. When people work, Their wages are not a gift. This is Romans 4 through 5. But something that they have earned. But people are counted as righteous, not because of their work, but because of their faith in God who forgives sinners. And he goes on in verse 16 to say, so the promise is received by faith. It is given as a free gift, and we are all certain to receive it. Whether or not we live according to the law of Moses, if we have faith like Abraham's, for Abraham is the father of all who believe. Again, it wasn't the law that saved them. It was their faith in Jesus Christ. He made that abundantly clear. That's what he taught. And saying that keeping the law basically plays no part in salvation. It does not save you. He shares this over and over. You don't have to change culturally to be saved. He shares this in 1 Corinthians 7:17 through 19. But as God has distributed to each one, again, these are books I'm quoting that were already in circulation. And we'll talk about that. He doesn't just dismiss the law. As we go through this study, you'll see a lot of similarities, and I'll kind of tie it all together at the end of this study between Jesus, what Jesus was accused of, and what Paul is being accused of. Jesus said, "I did not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it." That's what he did. And Paul did not come to destroy the law, right? But to share Jesus Christ as the Messiah, specifically to his people. And so that in 1 Corinthians 17, I didn't read it, but as God has distributed to each one, as the Lord has called each one, so let him walk. And so I ordain in all the churches. Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. But keeping the commandments of God is what matters. And what were the commandments of God? Love the Lord your heart. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love others as yourself. Those are the two commandments that contained all the law in them. That's what the commandments he was talking about. So, again, his truth, everyone is saved the same way. Keeping the law does not save you. And he's been preaching that. He does not dismiss the law. James sees, again, this as a problem. He makes a suggestion. It almost is, hey, he tells them to basically take a Nazirite vow. Take a Nazirite vow and sponsor these other individuals. And Paul agrees. And James's agenda in this situation is to help reconcile Paul with the Messianic Jews in Jerusalem. And the question most individuals have at this point is Paul compromising his principles and his teachings by taking this Nazirite vow to reconcile himself with the Jews? And that's what we'll try to answer. Right? Why did Paul go along with this whole thing? And so he did. Now, a Nazirite vow didn't save anyone. It was just to show your devotion or your commitment to the Lord. You can read all about it in the book of Numbers chapter 6. It'll tell you all about it. Basically, you go 30 days with no meat, no wine. He didn't shave. Some of you guys are asking, is Kyle taking a Nazirite vow? He hasn't cut his hair in so long. My wife's asking the same thing. But I really have a plan of growing it as long as Mike Moran back there. We'll see. We'll see if I can, without my wife shaving it during the night. She threatens it many, many, many times. All right. So with that, okay. Again, a Nazirite vow was just to show his devotion and commitment to the Lord. And so he agrees to do this. And we'll talk about why he agrees here in a second. But he agrees to be purified with them. They already done this through mikvahs. This is something customary to the Jews. He's going to pay their expenses. They offer sacrifices at the end of this thing to, again, show their commitment and dedication to the Lord. And so he has these four individuals. Um, and he's already done this before, chapter 18, verse 18. He's already shaved his head to show his dedication. He's taken this uh, Nazarite vow before. And James asks him to help him, again, reconcile with the Jews, but to prove nothing to the rumors, to walk orderly, to keep the law. And at this point, Paul makes a decision. Paul decides to go along with this, and he does not do this for righteousness' sake. Otherwise, he would be contradicting his own teaching. Romans 10:4 says, "For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes." Romans 10:4. He does this specifically to reach the Jews themselves. Romans 9:3 says, "For I could wish that I myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my countrymen according to the flesh." So what he's doing this to reach, again, his purpose is to reach his countrymen who were, again, hard-headed towards Jesus being the Messiah. So he went, and we could see even in his ministry, he went to great lengths not to be labeled someone who was anti-law. He was all about using the law lawfully. He writes this in 1 Timothy 1:8. But we know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully. And how does one use it lawfully? He goes on to explain this in other books. Romans 3:19. Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. The law was to show that you were guilty. That's what the law's intention. Just walk somebody through the 10 Commandments. Hopefully they haven't murdered someone. You might want to remove yourself from that conversation at that point. No, I'm just kidding. But you walk through the 10 Commandments, and most people would hopefully admit that they violated one, if not all of those. And you could take it to Jesus' standards in Matthew 5 and the Sermon on the Mount. And each one of those. You hated a brother. You committed murder in your heart already. Those kind of things. But again, we need to use the law lawfully. And he says in Galatians 3, so Romans 3:19, I just read Galatians 3:24. Therefore, the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. And I wouldn't, again, go over this, but it's still a problem with individuals. Um, you know, um, you go into legalism thinking that the law makes you righteous or the law saves you. Neither of those are true. Right? The law is to show you're guilty. Right? And so that was the purpose of the law. He even, in order, and when I said he went great lengths to be not labeled anti-law, remember what he had Timothy do. Because Timothy was of a Jewish culture, he had him get circumcised in order not to cause a stumbling block to the religious Jews in ministry. He asked him. Now, he did not ask the same thing of Titus. Titus was not of a Jewish culture, right? And so, even though they were individuals, they were pastors, essentially, that he was instructing. What you see with Paul is how he uses his liberties. And that's what you're going to see in this. He's going to use his liberties. He doesn't have to take this Nazarite vow, but he's going to do it in order to remove basically himself from the equation and have the opportunity to share Jesus with these individuals. Right? So they're not going to make it about the law because he's doing the things in which to fulfill the law by their standards. They're still going to have problems with him, and we'll see that. But he wants to reach them. A great passage, 1 Corinthians 8, chapters 8 through 10, really talk about liberties and how we're supposed to use them. 1 Corinthians 9, probably my favorite passage in the book of Corinthians. I can't say that. Like 1 Corinthians 15:2, Never mind. Ranks in the top 10. 16 chapters, so hopefully not discluding any of them. So 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23 says this: For though I am free from all men, and he understands he's free in Christ. He goes from there. I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law towards God, but under law towards Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I might be partaker of it with you. And again, he's given up his liberties, going along with this Nazirite vow, which he was not opposed to try to reach, to have an opportunity to reach these individuals. James was also, had the proper agenda, right, trying to get him reconciled. He wanted to, and that's, again, we need to be careful about our liberties. Every time I open up this can of worms, I want to talk about it. Right? We have all sorts of freedoms inside our relationship with the Lord. Right? He's not compromising. Right? Thou shalt nots. Right? He has freedoms, and he's basically choosing what to do with his liberties. The Bible says it has all sorts of things to say about our liberties. Right? The problem we use oftentimes, we think we're not responsible towards other individuals with our liberties. The Bible does not preach that. We are responsible to use our liberties, right? Being mindful of the weaker brother. And so we need to be careful of those things, right? And the Bible says we use our liberties. In Galatians, I think it is, to serve one another. It says that in Galatians 5:13. I'm free to do all these things, but I need to be mindful of how we use our liberties. There's passage after passage on this. Do I want to read? I'll just do this, just to kind of give you, it's not going to be any in-depth on this, but I'm going to read you the passages that speak to the liberties and how we're to use them. I actually, haven't been in I led a single study. I had these passages written down, right? Because a lot of the attitudes in that single studies were, my liberties, I don't care what you think about them, right? I'm going to use them as I please. And so I had to kind of get that mindset. It wasn't a biblical mindset. And these are the passages that I'd walk them through. Romans 14, and we'll go to the right at this point. Romans, I'll just read them, kind of leave it there. I just want you to know they're out there. Okay, where is that list? There it is. Romans 14, 16 through 21. It says, Therefore, do not let your good be spoken of as evil. For the kingdom of God is not eating and drinking, but righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit. For he who serves Christ in these things is acceptable to God and approved by men. Therefore, let us pursue the things which make for peace and the things by which one may edify another. Do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. And the idea is you don't go to a Jewish home, bringing a pig with you, fried up, right? It's thinking you're okay with them because, hey, you have the liberty. You're a Christian now, right? You just don't, you're mindful, right? That's an offense to them. You're not going to have a chance to reach them if, that's where you're coming in on some pork rinds, right? Are they against pork rinds? I imagine they are. My family's against pork rinds. I love them, but they're all against it too. But Romans 4:16, therefore let us pursue things which make for peace and the things which one may edify one another. Do not destroy the work of God for the sake of all food. All things indeed are pure, but It is evil for the man who eats with offense. It is good neither to eat meat, nor drink wine, nor do anything by which your brother stumbles, or is offended, or is made weak. Notice Paul doesn't say, just get over it. Right? I can have a drink. But if it's going to cause someone to stumble, right, is it more important for a drink than it's the person's salvation? And he's talking to weaker brothers. Right? Do you care more for that brother than you do for that drink? And so, because of the background I came from as a partier and all that stuff, I have chosen not to drink, uh, for my whole Christian. I haven't had a drink since my wedding day, 18 and a half years ago, something like that. Coming up and something like that, 18 and a half years ago, right? So, again, I don't want to cause individuals to stumble. All that, he then goes on in 1 Corinthians 6:12, saying this, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Again, understanding he has liberties, but he wants to make sure that they're not governing his life. Just because I love that saying, just because you can doesn't mean you have to, right? Or it doesn't mean you do, just because you can. Then chapter 8, verse 9, 1 Corinthians 8, verse 9. But beware lest somehow this liberty of yours becomes a stumbling block to those who are weak. We asked the question a couple weeks ago, are we our brother's keeper? The Bible over and over says we are. We're responsible as believers, right, to represent Christ as an ambassador. And so we are our brother's keepers in the fact that we need to care their opinion. That does not mean that individual, it's talking about weaker brothers, doesn't mean somebody who's been following the Lord. Sometimes they're 20, 30 years in following the Lord, they say, oh, that's causing me to stumble, that you're watching that kind of movie, or for example. No, it's not. Right? There's discernment there. That's not causing you to stumble. Mature Christians, are not in the same category. Right? It may be offensive, it's probably not wise, but it's not causing that person to stumble in that situation. So we need to consider that too. It goes on in chapter 10, verse 23. He says this, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. They don't build up individuals. That's what edify means, build up. Then you have Galatians, right here. Again, these are passages that are written, these books were written before Paul finds himself here in Jerusalem. 5:13, for you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Only do not use your liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. And the last one, and this was written actually after this scenario by Peter himself, but this is what Peter has to say about it. 1 Peter 2:16 be my last. If I can find Peter, that is always a challenge. 1 Peter 2:16 says this. I'll read 15. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, yet not using liberty as a cloak for vice, but as bondservants of God. Again, the last thing we'll share on that. So, again, he has the liberty, Paul, in this situation, but he's choosing his liberty to provide an opportunity to reach these individuals. Again, he wanted peace with these individuals. And obviously, they're not going to be at peace with him, and we'll find that out in just a second, but he wanted peace with them to have an opportunity to reach them. And blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Right? He wanted an opportunity to be able to speak into their lives. Romans 12:18 says this, if it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. So he's trying to find a way. He's not compromising his ideals. He's not compromising what the Word of God says, but he's trying to find an opportunity to speak into these individuals' lives. Chuck says this, right? He calls it Chuck 1:1, right? Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be broken. Right? Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be broken. The idea that, he's using his liberty at this point to try to reach these individuals. And what does God have to say over this whole thing? If you notice in a chapter or two, he says this in Acts 23:11. But the following night the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome. So what does this have to do with it? There's not condemnation there. Hey, you didn't really do a good job there in Jerusalem. You could have maybe not compromised, or he didn't say anything of that nature. He basically says, hey, you did what you were called to do there in Jerusalem. Now I'm going to move you on to Rome. So there's not condemnation, but there's a commendation. I had to say it 3 times. Maybe make it sound like English. With that, you have James then going on from this subject to say, yes, we agree with you on how we are dealing with the Gentiles. They've already written a letter. You see that in Acts 15, verse 20. That's, again, at this time in circulation, basically saying, hey, what was surmised was, we can't hold to the law. How are we going to make the Gentiles hold to the law? And again, that doesn't save them. And so what we want them to do is keep from idols, from blood, from how things are bled out, strangled, and from sexual immorality. And if they do those things, again, that's what it means to walk with the Lord. And James, on this issue, says it's, again, not faith by works, but faith that works. There's an example of what it means to follow the Lord. Again, it's not faith by works, but it's faith that works. It's a response that God's looking for. And then we see Paul following through with this whole thing. He's purified. He says he's going to do this Nazirite vow. Numbers 6:13 says this. That speaks to this whole event. Now this is the law of the Nazirite. When the days of the separation are fulfilled, he shall be brought to the door of the tabernacle meeting. So they're going through all these things. Paul is going through all these things. So James and Paul kind of agree that this might provide a way in which he could reach the Israelites. But do they respond lovingly? It does not seem so. They're just still trying to find a way in which to dismiss him. You see this going from verse 27 to verse 29. Let's read that. Now when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, Men of Israel, help! This is a man who teaches all men everywhere against the people, the law, and this place. And furthermore, he also brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place. For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. And so they are not satisfied. Again, it was the time of year where this Jerusalem would swell up, and men from all around the nations. Here, when he's talking about Asia, he's talking about Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, where Paul had already established some churches there, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, some of the ones we see in the book of Revelation. He had already established there, but the religious Jews were not happy with him there. They followed him, found out he was there. They basically, again, accuse him of what the religious Jews in Jerusalem were accusing him of, disobeying the law. This was the same accusations Paul would probably have been familiar with just some 20 years earlier, when this is what Stephen was accused of. The same things. It says in Acts 6:13, they also set up false witnesses who said, This man does not cease to speak blasphemous words against the holy place and the law. So Paul, this might have been familiar to him. He was probably on the other end of that time, accusing Stephen of what they were accusing him of at this point. And they also accused him of defiling the temple. Again, Trophimus was an Ephesian, a Gentile. He was not allowed in a certain part of the temple. Right, there's the temple of women. I was going to bring a picture. I will next week to give you kind of a layout of what it looks like on the Temple Mount where Antonio's fortress is, because that's going to play big here. He's going to do a speech from that, starting in chapter 22. And I'll give you where they're accusing. And Paul knows the law better than they all would, and he wouldn't have done that. Again, he was trying to provide an opportunity, trying not to make a point. He wasn't trying to make a point to them. He was trying to reach them. So he wouldn't have brought Trophimus. Again, these are just accusations. They've uncovered signs that stood outside the woman's court in the temple that basically says all Gentiles are to stay out. That's apparent there. So you have the riot breaking out at this point. They take Paul outside the city gate and try to kill him. The whole city's disturbed. It's, again, enlarged at this point, enraged. We see, and hopefully as I've gone through this, you see similarities to Jesus' last visit to Jerusalem. And so, this has already occurred to Paul. Right? It's happened in Philippi. This mob-like mentality, it happened to him in Thessalonica. It happened to him in Ephesus. And now here it's happening in Jerusalem. They're seeking to kill him. This is what it says in John 15, 17 through 8. These things I command you, that you love one another. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. Don't be surprised, is what Jesus says. If you're living like Christ, it is not going to be accepted everywhere. With this commotion, the individuals, you have the commander of the garrison. He's alerted at this point to this uproar. They were probably on high alert during these feast days. Last thing they wanted was a rebellion. And so they were there at Antonio's fortress, which was overlooking the Temple Mount to the northwest part of it. There were some stairs. They probably bring down, it tells us they bring down a bunch of soldiers, centurions. Centurion means 100, so at least 200 soldiers were coming down with this individual, and he ran down to them. They wanted to stop this whole scene. I'm going to read the rest of this before I continue to speak. Verse 30, and all the city was disturbed, and the people ran together, seized Paul, and dragged him out of the temple, and immediately the doors were shut. Now as they were seeking to kill him, news came to the commander of the garrison of all Jerusalem, that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. He immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them, and when they saw the commander and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Then the commander came near and took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains, and he asked who he was and what he had done. And some among the multitude cried out one thing and some another. So when he could not ascertain the truth because of the tumult, he commanded him to be taken into the barracks. When he had reached the stairs, he had to be carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the mob. For the multitude of the people followed after, crying out, away with him. And so we have, again, the riot breaking out. They're trying to kill him. He's rescued by this commander of the Roman garrison, not to start basically a rebellion. And so the soldiers ran down from Antonio's fortress. The crowd at that point stopped beating Paul, seeing the soldiers. Obviously had respect for these soldiers. We see they bound Paul with 2 chains. That was just predicted by the prophet Agabus in the chapter before. So a lot of this, again, historical accounts. And the commander wanted answers to who he was and what he had done. The crowd basically crying out gave him confusing answers. They cried one thing or another. Again, similar to Jesus's visit to Jerusalem, his last visit to Jerusalem. They say, "Away with him." That's the exact words that Jesus heard. They all cried out at once, it says in Luke 23:18, saying, "Away with this man and release to us Barabbas." So similar words to what Jesus heard. Um, so the commander needs clarification, so he carries him, right, to not get beaten. Basically has to carry him up to these stairs. And like I said, next week we'll show you these stairs. And then we have, just at the end of this chapter, a little conversation between this commander and Paul. Let's read it. So then the commander came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman?" Then the commander came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman?" He said, "Yes." The commander answered, "With a large sum I obtained this citizenship." Whoa. Am I reading? Sorry. I'm reading the next chapter. That was awesome. I'm like, I've not seen those words. All right. Uh, then, as Paul was about to be led into the barracks, he said to the commander, "May I speak to you?" He replied, "Can you speak Greek? Are you not the Egyptian who some time ago stirred up a rebellion and led the 4,000 assassins out into the wilderness?" But Paul said, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Sicily, a citizen of no mean city, and I implore you, permit me to speak to the people." So when he had given him permission, Paul stood on the stairs and motioned with his hand to the people. And when there was a great silence, he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, saying, and so you have the rescue, you have the request, "May I speak with you?" The commander, surprised that this individual spoke Greek. Uh, Greek was the language of the educated, how they transacted money and those kind of things. And so he thought, it says he was the Egyptian. We know that an event took place in 54 AD, so about 6 years prior to this. This was probably occurred about 60 AD. Josephus writes, who's a Jewish historian, writes about the fact that this Egyptian basically led 4,000 people to the Mount of Olives with the intention to take over the Temple Mount. And the Romans quickly quelched that rebellion, but the leader fled and escaped. He got out of the known as the Egyptian. So he thought he might be that individual. Uh, no, he says, "No, I'm a Jew from Tarsus." And again, Tarsus would have meant something to this Roman commander because it was almost equally culturally on the same level as Rome, Athens, and Alexandria. Um, it was known for its education, known for its culture, Roman culture, those kind of things. He says, "I'm a Jew from Tarsus." He also would have recognized, being part of Tarsus, the emperor of Rome basically granted all citizenship to those individuals um, in Tarsus. So he would recognize he's now dealing with a Roman citizen, and there's different qualifications, different things in which he was to handle this. Um, you know, so he basically um, then Paul, knowing where the Roman commander is at this point, knowing he has a Roman citizen, he has rights. It's not like uh, it would be for individuals that were not citizens. So he asks permission to speak to his accusers, again, showing his heart rather than, just let me all appeal this to Rome kind of thing, which he will do later, but he's wanting to take this opportunity. And that where he's situated is he'll be able to address the crowd. We know the crowd was following them, right, to make sure that the Romans took care of this guy. And so he used this opportunity. And someone says this is a miracle because basically raised his hands, the whole crowd silenced, and he started addressing them in Hebrew. So they now understand he's um, he's speaking their language, and so what he's going to do with that, he's going to pronounce the um, gospel to them that Jesus was Messiah, and we'll get to that whole sermon tomorrow. Not tomorrow. You don't have to come next Sunday. So what I want to kind of end with is the similarities between, and I've hinted at this the whole time, between Jesus and Paul in Acts 20 and 21. Like Jesus, Paul traveled to Jerusalem with a group of disciples. Like Jesus, Paul had opposition from hostile Jews who plotted against his life. Like Jesus, Paul made or received 3 successive predictions of his coming sufferings in Jerusalem, but still purposed, right, to go that way, including being handed over to the Gentiles. Like Jesus, Paul had followers who tried to discourage him from going to Jerusalem. Like Jesus, Paul declared his readiness to lay down his life. Like Jesus, he was determined to complete his ministry and not be deflected from it. Like Jesus, Paul expressed his commitment to the will of God. Like Jesus, Paul came to Jerusalem to give something. Like Jesus, Paul was unjustly arrested based on false accusations. Like Jesus, Paul alone is arrested, but none of the other followers of Jesus. Like Jesus, Paul heard the mob crying out, "Away with him." Like Jesus, the Roman officer did not know Paul's true identity. Like Jesus, Paul was associated with terrorists by Roman officials. In a way unique to most of us, Paul really did know the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death. That's a verse quoted out of Philippians 3:10. And Paul's particular call and ministry make these similarities especially striking. But the Bible goes on to say and says that we are called to follow after Jesus also. We shouldn't be surprised when events in our lives are like the events in Jesus' life. There may be a time of temptation in the wilderness, a time when people come to us with needs only God can meet, a time when we seem at the mercy of a storm, a time when we must cry out to God, as in the Garden of Gethsemane, a time when we must simply lay down our lives and trust God will gloriously raise it up. We, like Paul, are predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. And that's not only in character, but sometimes we're going to go through the same sufferings and same trials. Maybe not to the extent of these individuals, but we should not be surprised when we go through them. That's something we can gather from this. I like, and I've been sharing this a lot. Someone said that we shouldn't be surprised. Well, Jesus said this I think, in John 17. You should not be surprised that how they treated me is how they're going to treat the Jesus living inside of you. So when you have Jesus living inside of you, right, you might not be treated necessarily fair, but we need to expect that. Right? But that should not get us off mission, right, to share Jesus by our words and by the way we live our lives. Right? Our lives and our bodies are His. Right? That's what the Bible asks from us. Well, sorry, that's what Jesus asks from us. Right? To die to ourselves daily, and live for Him and live for Him. And the cool thing about that is the Lord will give us the ability to do all of that. And so that's where I'm going to end, and we're going to pray. Lord, again, thank you for your word. Thank you for Paul's example. One of his more favorite quotes is imitate me. Well, verses is imitate me as I imitate the Lord. And we see what a great example here. And he's not going to dismiss the opportunity that you get give him. He's going to share Jesus. Lord, sometimes we don't understand why we're going through something. Well, but you make it clear that people are watching how we handle as Christians. They know us to be Christians. How can we represent you? How can we go through with the joy that is given by you through these situations, other than you empowering us to do it? Lord, help us to be an example when we're going through trials. Lord, when we're going through hard things. Lord, we're in this world just like anyone else. And Lord, world's not favorable to you, Lord, but yet you still want to save each and every individual. So help us to be an example by being empowered by your Spirit, walking with you, Lord, and opening our mouth. Give us opportunities. Lay aside our liberties, lay aside anything that might not give us that opportunity. A lot of times that is just us getting out of the way and sharing what you have done, what not only did 2,000 years ago, but what you're doing in us currently. Just the wonderful works you do in each and every one of us. Lord, help us again. Give us those opportunities as we go about